The screech of metal against metal still echoed in my ears as I hurried through the lobby of Vertex Solutions. My hands trembled slightly, adrenaline still coursing through my veins. The car accident hadn't been serious, just a fender bender, but it had shaken me up. I'd called ahead to let them know I'd be 10 minutes late, but no one had answered. I stepped into the elevator, trying to steady my breathing. As director of client acquisition, I'd never been late before, not once in my 3 years at the company. My perfect attendance record was part of what had made me a rising star. That and the fact that I was about to close the biggest deal in company history with Millennium Corp. The elevator doors opened to the hushed atmosphere of our office floor. A few colleagues glanced up as I passed, their expressions unreadable. I slid into my chair, set down my coffee, and logged into my computer. One new email. From Marcus Walsh, my manager. The subject line alone made my stomach drop. Employment termination, effective immediately. I blinked, sure I'd read it wrong, but the words remained, cold and clear on my screen. I opened it with trembling fingers. Due to your failure to adhere to company attendance policies, your employment with Vertex Solutions is terminated, effective immediately. Please clear your desk and return all company property to HR before leaving the premises. The email was short, clinical, no mention of my spotless record or the fact that I'd never been late before. No acknowledgement of the Millennium deal I'd spent 6 months cultivating, the deal set to increase our revenue by 40% this year alone. I looked up from my screen toward Marcus's glass-walled office. He was watching me, his thin lips curled into what looked almost like satisfaction. Our eyes met, and he didn't look away. Instead, he gave a small shrug as if to say, "That's business." My chest tightened. This wasn't about being 10 minutes late. This was about last week's executive meeting, where the CEO had praised my work in front of everyone while barely acknowledging Marcus. This was about the rumors that I was being considered for a senior position, maybe even his position. I'd noticed his growing coldness, the way he'd started excluding me from meetings, the subtle undermining comments. But I never thought he'd go this far. My phone buzzed. A calendar reminder. Zoom with Millennium Corp, 9:30 a.m. In 15 minutes. I stared at the reminder, my mind racing. The Millennium deal was supposed to be my crowning achievement. After months of building relationships, addressing concerns, and crafting the perfect proposal, they were finally ready to sign. The CEO himself had requested a final call this morning to formalize things. And now, what? Was Marcus planning to take the call himself? To swoop in and claim credit for all my work now that I was out of the picture? As if reading my thoughts, another email popped up. A calendar invitation from Marcus for the exact same Zoom call. He'd already removed me as the host and added himself. Something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let him steal this. Not after everything I'd put into it. But what could I do? For now, I had no idea. I just clicked off my laptop and stared into the empty space. Then I began gathering my things. Pictures of my family. My spare blazer. The plant my team had given me after our first major win together. I worked methodically, ignoring the curious stares from colleagues who'd noticed something was wrong. Just as I was closing my bag, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of Marcus's voice through his office walls, unnaturally loud and strained. "What do you mean you won't proceed?" Marcus's voice carried across the now silent office. Everyone had stopped what they were doing, attention turning toward his glass office. I paused, my hand on my bag. "But we've worked for months on this deal." A pause. "She's no longer with the company." Another pause, longer this time. "A personnel issue? Look, I can handle everything moving forward." Even from across the room, I could see his face reddening, the vein in his forehead becoming more pronounced. "That's completely unreasonable. You can't just... Hello? Hello?" The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus stared at his screen in disbelief, then slammed his hand against his desk so hard that his coffee mug toppled over, spilling across papers. I should have felt satisfaction. Instead, all I felt was a hollow ache. 6 months of work, relationships built, trust earned, all potentially wasted because of his petty jealousy. I slung my bag over my shoulder and headed for the door, head held high despite the weight in my chest. As I reached the elevator, I heard it, a scream of pure frustration echoing through the halls, following me as the doors closed. The lobby security guard gave me a sympathetic nod as I walked out clutching my box of belongings. Rough day, Miss Parker? You could say that, Eddie, I managed, forcing a smile. Outside, I stood on the sidewalk, suddenly directionless. 3 years of purpose, gone in an instant. I pulled out my phone, considering who to call. When it buzzed in my hand, James Chen. Emily, he said when I answered, his voice warm but concerned. What the hell is happening over there? I just had the strangest call with someone claiming to be taking over the Millennium account. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice steady. I was fired this morning, James, 10 minutes after arriving at work. What? Why? Officially, I was 10 minutes late today. Had a minor car accident on the way in. I paused. Unofficially, I think Marcus felt threatened. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, well, that explains his awkward behavior. I made it clear to him that Millennium has no interest in proceeding without you. This partnership was built on trust, your trust specifically. A flicker of hope ignited in my chest, quickly followed by resignation. I appreciate that, James, but I've been terminated. There's nothing. Actually, he interrupted, this might be the perfect opportunity to reassess the terms of our arrangement. By the time I arrived home, my phone was lighting up with notifications, messages from confused colleagues, an email from HR with exit paperwork, and, most surprisingly, 3 missed calls from Marcus himself. I ignored them all, focusing instead on brewing a strong cup of coffee. My hands had finally stopped shaking, replaced by a strange, calm clarity. James's words kept replaying in my mind. Don't respond to anyone from Vertex yet. Let them sweat a little. He'd explained that Millennium had been considering expanding the deal even further, potentially tripling its initial value. They'd planned to discuss it in today's call, a surprise Marcus had inadvertently ruined. My doorbell rang, startling me. Through the peephole, I spotted a courier holding a lavish flower arrangement. The card read, "A misunderstanding. Please call me urgently, Marcus." I laughed bitterly, tossing the card into the trash. The flowers I placed on my neighbor's doorstep, no sense in wasting them. My phone rang again. Marcus. Again, I sent it to voicemail. Then a text arrived, not from Marcus but from Diane Reynolds, one of the board members. Emily, I've just heard disturbing news. Would you be willing to meet discreetly? This situation isn't sitting right with many of us. This was unexpected. Diane had always been professional but distant. Diane suggested we meet at a small cafe 10 blocks from the office. When I arrived, she was already seated in a corner booth, looking remarkably out of place in her designer suit. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual immaculate bun, but the creases around her eyes betrayed her concern. "Thank you for coming," she said, gesturing for me to sit. "I'll be direct. The board was expecting a champagne toast today, not a crisis." I remained silent, waiting. Marcus told us there was a temporary delay with Millennium. He claimed you had a family emergency. She raised an eyebrow. Then I received a call from Patricia in HR about an abrupt termination form she'd been asked to process. I placed Marcus's termination email on the table, sliding it toward her. "No family emergency, just this." She read it, her expression darkening. 10 minutes late? After a car accident? She shook her head. "This is absurd." "It gets worse," I said quietly. "Millennium won't move forward without me." James Chen made that clear to Marcus during their call. Diane's eyes widened slightly, the most emotion I'd ever seen from her. "How much do you know about today's board meeting agenda, Emily?" "Nothing. Why?" "Because we were supposed to announce the Millennium deal to our investors. It's already been factored into this quarter's projections." 2 days of silence followed. I maintained radio silence despite an escalating series of messages from Marcus. First apologetic, then offering a 15% raise, finally culminating in barely concealed panic. "You're putting the entire company at risk. People's jobs are at stake." I forwarded each message to Diane without comment. Meanwhile, I received constant updates from my former team. Marcus had called an emergency meeting, demanding they recreate my presentations and contact lists for Millennium. He'd tried, reaching James Chen repeatedly, only to be blocked by gatekeepers who mysteriously had no availability. On the 3rd morning, I received an email from Vertex's CEO, Robert Crawford, a man I'd spoken to perhaps twice in my entire time at the company. The subject line was simple: meeting request. The message was equally direct: Emily, it has come to my attention that there may have been a significant error in judgment regarding your employment. The board has called an emergency session today at 2 p.m. Your presence would be greatly appreciated. Car service will be provided. Attached was a non-disclosure agreement for the meeting. I forwarded it to James Chen with a single question mark. His response came within minutes. Perfect timing. Millennium's expanded offer is ready. Remember what we discussed? Know your worth. I signed the NDA and replied to Crawford, I'll be there. The boardroom felt colder than I remembered, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city below. 12 pairs of eyes tracked me as I entered, expressions ranging from curiosity to concern. Marcus sat at the far end, his complexion ashen. CEO Robert Crawford stood. Emily, thank you for coming. Given the unusual circumstances, we felt a direct conversation was warranted. I took the empty seat, painfully aware that it was positioned directly across from Marcus. I'll be blunt, Crawford continued. We've received troubling information from Millennium. They're refusing to proceed with our partnership unless you're involved. His gaze shifted momentarily to Marcus. Can you explain what's happening? I placed a folder on the table, sliding it toward Crawford. This contains 3 things. First, the termination email I received for being 10 minutes late after a car accident. Second, documentation of the systematic exclusion and undermining I've experienced over the past month. And third, a statement from Millennium CEO James Chen explaining why they won't work with anyone else. The room grew deathly quiet as Crawford read through the pages, occasionally passing them to other board members. Finally, he looked up. Marcus, would you care to explain why you fired our top-performing director without consultation during the most important deal in our company's history? Marcus's explanation was a masterclass in corporate doublespeak. He cited ongoing performance concerns that somehow had never made it into my reviews. He claimed the termination was already in process, and my tardiness was simply the final incident. When he finished, Diane Reynolds removed her glasses slowly. Interesting, because I have here your performance assessments of Emily from the past year, all exemplary. She turned to me. Emily, what would it take for you to come back and salvage the Millennium situation? Before I could answer, Marcus interrupted. She can't just dictate terms after abandoning her responsibilities. I've already. Marcus. Crawford's voice cut through the room like ice. You've done enough. All eyes returned to me. I felt a curious calm settle over me as I laid out my conditions. First, I want a promotion to Executive Director of Client Partnerships, reporting directly to the CEO. Second, I want a compensation package that reflects my value to this company, specifically 20% of the Millennium deal's first-year revenue. Third, I want a public acknowledgement that my termination was wrongful. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus's face had gone from red to purple. Finally, Crawford leaned forward. Those are steep demands, Emily. I met his gaze steadily. So was firing me over being 10 minutes late. The board's counteroffer came quickly. Executive director position, 15% of the Millennium deal, and a formal retraction of the termination with a misunderstanding narrative for the staff. I held firm. 20% was non-negotiable. When I mentioned that Millennium was planning to triple their initial commitment, the atmosphere in the room shifted palpably. Quick calculations flashed behind everyone's eyes. Even at 20%, the company would still be making substantially more than they'd projected. Crawford called for a brief recess. As board members filtered out for coffee, Marcus approached me, his voice low and urgent. You can't do this. You can't just waltz back in and take my department. I regarded him coolly. I'm not taking your department, Marcus. I'm building something new, something you were too insecure to let me create under your leadership. This isn't over, he hissed. You're right, I replied. It's just beginning. When the board returned, Crawford cleared his throat. We're prepared to meet your terms with one condition. You must close the expanded Millennium deal within 30 days. I nodded, extending my hand. I'll need full access restored by end of day, and I'll be bringing back any team members who left because of this situation. Done, Crawford said, shaking my hand firmly. Welcome back, Executive Director Parker. The following morning, I arrived at Vertex at precisely 8 a.m. Eddie, the security guard, broke into a broad grin when he saw me. "Welcome back, Miss Parker. Heard the news. Couldn't have happened to a better person." The office was buzzing with speculation. My abrupt firing and even more abrupt reinstatement, with a promotion, no less, had fueled the rumor mill to unprecedented levels. IT had already set up my new office, a corner space with windows on two sides, significantly larger than my previous one. My old team was waiting inside, along with two former colleagues who'd quit in protest after my termination. "The prodigal boss returns," quipped Sam, my senior account manager, pulling me into a quick hug. "With reinforcements," added Zoe, gesturing to the returnees. I smiled, genuinely touched. "Thank you all for your loyalty. It won't be forgotten." I took a deep breath. Now, we have exactly 30 days to close an expanded Millennium deal that will change everything for this company and for each of us. As we began strategizing, I noticed Marcus through the glass wall, watching from across the floor. His expression was unreadable, but the rigid set of his shoulders told me everything I needed to know. He'd been moved to a smaller office, no longer a department head, just a senior consultant, according to the updated org chart. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. My new team and I worked relentlessly to restructure the Millennium proposal, incorporating their expanded needs and creating a seamless implementation plan. The deal had grown to nearly $30 million, more than triple the original estimate. Marcus, meanwhile, seemed determined to undermine me at every turn. He accidentally scheduled conflicting meetings with key stakeholders. Important files mysteriously disappeared from shared drives. Team members reported uncomfortable conversations where he hinted my position was temporary. I documented everything meticulously, but chose not to escalate yet. I needed to focus on Millennium. On day 15, a breakthrough. James Chen agreed to sign the preliminary agreement, officially putting Millennium on the books. The entire office erupted in applause when the news broke, people stopping by my door with congratulations and relieved smiles. That afternoon, I received an email from Crawford. "Board dinner tomorrow night to celebrate the preliminary signing. Investors will be present. Business formal." As I was preparing to leave, I noticed Marcus lingering by the elevator, his expression calculating. When our eyes met, he smiled, a cold, deliberate smile that sent a shiver down my spine. Something was coming. I could feel it. The moment I walked into the restaurant's private dining room, I knew something was wrong. The atmosphere was tense, conversations unnaturally quiet. Crawford approached immediately, steering me toward a secluded corner. "There's been a development," he said, his voice low. "Marcus has made allegations of client theft. He claims you've been sharing proprietary Vertex information with Millennium to secure your position." My blood ran cold. "That's absurd." "I know," Crawford sighed, "but several board members are concerned. He's presented emails that appear to show you offering Vertex's client list to Millennium." "The emails are fabricated," I said immediately. "I've never—" "I believe you," Crawford interrupted, "but we need to address this head-on. He's planning to bring it up during dinner." I felt a surge of anger, followed by clarity. "Does Marcus know that all our emails are backed up to a secure server administered by a third party?" Crawford frowned. "I'm not sure. And is he aware that Millennium records all their communication with potential partners as part of their compliance protocol?" A slow smile spread across Crawford's face. "Probably not." I nodded. "Then I say, we let him present his evidence. It'll be the last time he undermines anyone at this company." Marcus waited until the main course was served before making his move. He stood, tapping his glass with a spoon to gain attention. "Before we celebrate prematurely," he began, his voice carrying across the now silent room, "there's a matter of serious concern the board should be aware of." I remained perfectly still as he outlined his accusations, presenting printed emails that supposedly showed me offering Vertex's client information to Millennium in exchange for securing the deal. When he finished, all eyes turned to me. I took a slow sip of water before responding. "Those emails are fabricated. I never wrote them." Marcus scoffed. "Of course you'd say that, but the evidence can be verified quite easily," I interrupted smoothly. "Vertex contracts with Secure Archive for email backup. Every message is time-stamped and authenticated, and Millennium, as many of you know, records all partnership communications for compliance." The color drained from Marcus's face. I turned to Crawford. I move that we immediately request authentication of these alleged emails from both sources. Crawford nodded. Consider it, Marcus. If these prove to be fabricated, the consequences will be severe. Diane Reynolds leaned forward. I believe malicious falsification of evidence with intent to harm a colleague's reputation is grounds for immediate termination under our ethics policy. Marcus slowly sank back into his chair, the reality of his situation finally dawning on him. The verification results came back within 48 hours. As expected, the emails were proven fraudulent, created just days earlier and backdated. Marcus was terminated immediately, escorted from the building by security while the entire floor watched in stunned silence. I felt no satisfaction as I watched him leave, just a profound sense of exhaustion. The pettiness, the jealousy, the wasted energy, all of it seemed so pointless now. With Marcus gone, the atmosphere at Vertex shifted dramatically. People spoke more freely, shared ideas more openly. Several employees confided that they'd been targets of his subtle sabotage for years, always too afraid to speak up. The expanded Millennium deal was finalized a week ahead of schedule. $32 million, the largest single contract in Vertex's history. My 20% commission alone was more money than I'd ever imagined having. At the official signing ceremony, James Chen raised his glass with a knowing smile. To recognizing value, he said, his eyes meeting mine, and to the courage to demand it. Later, Crawford pulled me aside. The board is impressed, not just with the deal, but with how you handled everything. We're creating a new division focused on enterprise partnerships. We'd like you to lead it as senior vice president. I thought of Marcus's empty office, of all the needless drama, and smiled. I'd be honored. My first act as SVP was to review the company's termination policies. The existing process allowed managers too much autonomy and too little oversight, creating exactly the situation Marcus had exploited. I drafted new guidelines requiring HR and senior leadership review for all terminations, with additional protections for employees with good performance records. Crawford approved them immediately, sending a company-wide announcement praising the changes. My second act was more personal, promoting each member of my original team who'd stood by me. Loyalty deserved recognition. 3 months after the Millennium signing, I arrived at work to find a small package on my desk. Inside was a newspaper clipping, a profile of Marcus, who had apparently taken a mid-level position at a significantly smaller firm across town. There was no note, but I knew it was from Diane. Her way of saying closure was complete. That afternoon, during a routine department meeting, my assistant interrupted with an urgent message. Emily, Globex Corporation is on line 1. Their CEO wants to discuss potential partnerships. Globex, Millennium's biggest competitor. James Chen had mentioned they might reach out, impressed by our work. I smiled at my team. Let's show them what we can do. The cycle was complete. What began with an unfair termination had transformed into something I never could have imagined. A powerful new beginning. 1 year later, Vertex had changed beyond recognition. With both the Millennium and Globex partnerships thriving, our stock had doubled. The client acquisition division I led had expanded to 28 people across 3 teams, each specializing in different industry sectors. My office now occupied the corner space previously belonging to Crawford, who had been promoted to chairman. My team jokingly called it the throne room, a far cry from the cubicle where I'd opened that termination email. The company anniversary party was in full swing when I noticed a familiar face among the guests. Marcus. He stood awkwardly near the entrance, looking significantly older than when I'd last seen him. Apparently he'd been invited by an old colleague who'd taken pity on him. Our eyes met across the room. For a moment I considered avoiding him. Then, surprising myself, I walked over. Hello, Marcus. He tensed visibly. Emily, congratulations on all your success. Thank you. A pause. How are things at Raytech? He shrugged, attempting nonchalance. Fine. Good. Different culture, of course. Translation. Smaller, less prestigious, probably a fraction of his former salary. I should go, he said suddenly. I just came to say hello to a few people. As he turned to leave, I found myself saying, Marcus. He paused. We all make mistakes. The difference is learning from them. His expression flickered between resentment and something like gratitude before he disappeared into the crowd. Despite my success at Vertex, the memory of that termination email never fully faded. It had fundamentally changed how I viewed corporate loyalty, both to and from employees. This perspective led me to create Vertex's most innovative program yet, the Second Chance Initiative. We began actively recruiting talented professionals who had been unfairly terminated from other companies, offering them not just jobs but equity opportunities. The business press ate it up. Wrongful termination turned corporate strategy, read one headline. Parker's revenge, building an army of the underestimated, declared another. The reality was simpler. I recognized untapped potential where others saw only rejection. During a routine leadership meeting, Crawford announced his retirement, effective in 6 months. "And I'm recommending Emily Parker as my successor," he added, to thunderous applause from around the table. Later in private, he confided, "If Marcus hadn't fired you that day, none of this would have happened. Sometimes I wonder if we should thank him." I laughed, but the irony wasn't lost on me. My greatest professional setback had ultimately paved the way for my greatest triumph. That evening, I received a LinkedIn request from James Chen. His message read, "Ready for a new challenge? Millennium is looking for a CEO. The offer from Millennium was extraordinary. Double my current compensation, plus significant equity. You transformed one company from the inside," James said over dinner. "Imagine what you could do if you were running the whole show from day one." I promised to consider it carefully, though part of me already knew my answer. Vertex had become more than just an employer. It was the place where I discovered my true potential and resilience. 2 days later, news of Millennium's interest leaked to the board. Panic ensued. Emergency meetings were called. Counteroffer proposals flew back and forth. I sat in my office, watching the sunset paint the skyline in hues of orange and pink, thinking about that terrible morning when I'd cleared my desk with trembling hands. About Marcus's smirk as he'd watched me pack my things. My assistant knocked softly. "The board is ready for you." 12 anxious faces greeted me as I entered the boardroom, the same room where not long ago I'd fought for my 20% commission. "Emily," Diane began, "we understand Millennium has made you an offer. Before you decide, we'd like to present our proposal." She slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single page outlining their offer. CEO of Vertex, effective immediately. My choice of successor for my current role, an ownership stake that would make me the company's second-largest shareholder. My first week as CEO was surreal. The corner office with its panoramic views, the executive assistant who anticipated my needs before I voiced them, the subtle shift in how people addressed me, a new deference in their tone. But the most powerful moment came when I signed my first executive order, a complete overhaul of the company's ethics and termination policies. Every employee would now have direct recourse to an independent ombudsman. Performance reviews would be transparent and multi-sourced. No one would ever experience what I had. James Chen sent champagne with a handwritten note. "Wasn't sure you'd pass on our offer, but admire your choice. Millennium's loss is Vertex's gain." I kept the note in my desk drawer as a reminder of choices and consequences. During my first company-wide address, I surveyed the hundreds of faces looking up at me from the atrium. So many careers, so many livelihoods dependent on the decisions I would make. "Vertex's future begins today," I said into the microphone, my voice steady and clear. "A future where talent is recognized, where ethics matter, where we lift each other up instead of tearing each other down." The applause was thunderous, echoing through the building like a wave. Later, walking back to my office, I passed the small cubicle where Marcus had ended up in his final days. Now it belonged to a bright young analyst on my former team. Everything comes full circle, I thought. 6 months into my tenure as CEO, Vertex's transformation was making headlines. Our stock had climbed another 40%. The Second Chance Initiative had brought in talent that revitalized multiple departments. We'd secured 3 more enterprise-level partnerships using the blueprint I'd created with Millennium. I had just finished reviewing quarterly projections when my assistant announced an unexpected visitor. Robert Crawford, my predecessor, now enjoying semi-retirement as chairman emeritus. "Emily," he greeted me warmly, settling into a chair across from my desk. "The place is flourishing under your leadership. The board couldn't be happier." We chatted about recent developments until he finally came to the point of his visit. "There's something I've never told you," he said, his expression turning serious. "The day Marcus fired you, I was actually planning to promote you to the executive team. He knew about it. I had foolishly mentioned it during a private lunch, thinking he'd be supportive." I sat back, processing this new information. So he deliberately moved to get rid of me before the promotion could happen. Crawford nodded grimly. "He saw the opportunity when you were late that morning and acted immediately. By the time I heard about it, the damage was done." He paused. "I've always regretted not moving faster to fix it." "Everything worked out in the end," I said softly. "Better than any of us could have imagined." "Indeed," he smiled. "Sometimes the wrong train takes you to the right station." The company gala marking my first anniversary as CEO was the social event of the season. Business publications covered it extensively, focusing on Vertex's remarkable turnaround and our innovative corporate culture. During my speech, I specifically honored the team that had stood by me during my brief exile, all now executives in their own right. Their loyalty had been the foundation of everything we'd built since. Near the end of the evening, a junior employee approached me hesitantly. "Miss Parker, I just wanted to thank you for the Second Chance program. Before Vertex, I was fired from my previous job for taking time off when my mother was ill. I never thought I'd get another opportunity in this industry." Her words touched me deeply. This, more than stock prices or favorable press, was the legacy I wanted to build. Later that night, scrolling through photos from the event, I paused on one that captured a candid moment. Me surrounded by my original team, all of us laughing at some forgotten joke. We looked happy, united, unstoppable. I remembered the crushing feeling of reading that termination email, the walk of shame as I'd carried my belongings through the office. How final it had seemed at the time. Now it felt like the first page of a much longer, much better story. I saved the photo as my new desktop background, a reminder of how quickly fortunes can change, for better or worse. 2 years to the day after my termination and subsequent return, I received a LinkedIn message that stopped me cold. Marcus Roberts had applied for a position at one of our subsidiary companies. Apparently, he'd been downsized from his last role during a merger and had been searching for steady employment ever since. The hiring manager had recognized his name and flagged it for my attention, unsure how to proceed. I sat for a long time, staring at his profile. The photos showed a man who had aged considerably in just 2 years. Deeper lines around his eyes, hair noticeably grayer. My first instinct was immediate rejection. After all he'd done, the humiliation, the sabotage, the falsified evidence, how could I possibly allow him back into our corporate ecosystem? But then I thought about the Second Chance initiative and its core principle. Judging people on their potential, not their past mistakes. Would denying him be justified caution or petty revenge? I finally drafted a careful response. Forward his resume to HR for standard evaluation. If he meets the qualifications, he can be interviewed like any other candidate, but he is not eligible for any management role or position with direct reports. It was a compromise I could live with. Not forgiveness exactly, but not vengeance either. Sometimes the greatest power isn't in destroying your enemies, but in showing them a better way forward. 5 years after that fateful morning when a 10-minute delay changed the course of my career, I stood on stage accepting the Industry Leader of the Year award. Vertex had quadrupled in size under my leadership, becoming known not just for our services but for our revolutionary workplace practices. In my acceptance speech, I finally shared the full story publicly: the termination email, the fight for recognition, the tangled path that led to the CEO office. The audience sat in rapt attention as I described how that moment of professional rock bottom had ultimately launched me higher than I'd ever dreamed possible. Success isn't linear, I concluded. Sometimes the worst moments of our professional lives create the pivot points that lead to our greatest achievements. The key is recognizing that a setback, even an unfair one, isn't the end of your story unless you allow it to be. The standing ovation that followed felt like the final chapter of a long journey. Later, at the reception, a young professional approached me with tears in her eyes. "Your story changed my perspective completely," she said. "I was fired last month in similar circumstances. I've been feeling like a failure, But now I see it differently. I smiled, squeezing her hand. It's not about the fall. It's about how you rise afterward. And rise I had. Higher than anyone, especially Marcus, could have ever imagined.